"Mom, you're not on the list." My son stopped me at the entrance of my granddaughter's wedding in front of 200 people. "My name is Evelyn. I'm 72 years old, and I'm a widow." But they forgot one little detail. The person who paid for the entire party was me. I had spent the whole morning getting ready. You know how it is, a granddaughter's wedding. The first granddaughter getting married is an event one waits a lifetime for. I am so happy that you are here. If you are listening to this story, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. I want to know how far our grandmother stories reach. My Claire. It seemed like just yesterday I was changing that little girl's diapers, teaching her how to make the rice pudding that my late husband Arthur loved so much, and now she was getting married. A grandmother's heart can't contain the pride. I chose my best dress, a silk pink number I was saving for a special occasion. I put on the pearl necklace that belonged to my mother and that French perfume I only use on holidays like Easter or Christmas. I felt beautiful, dignified. I wanted Claire to look at me and see a happy grandmother, a matriarch. Little did I know that the role my son Richard had reserved for me was that of a nuisance. For the last 6 months, my life revolved around that wedding. Richard and my daughter-in-law Susan came to my house, sat in my velvet armchairs, drank my coffee, and with the sweetest eyes in the world, explained their difficulties. "Mom, you know, things are tough," Richard began, "and we want so badly to give Claire the wedding of her dreams. Being the fool that I am, I opened my heart and my wallet. 'How much does my granddaughter's dream wedding cost?' I asked. And they showed me estimates for an estate in the Hudson Valley, just outside New York City, which looked like a palace, a banquet that served lobster, and a dress that cost as much as a compact car. And I paid. I paid for everything, every cent, over $80,000, all transferred from my account, the account Arthur left me, so I would have a peaceful old age and be able to help the family. I signed the contracts. I negotiated with the vendors. My name was on every little piece of that party. I took an Uber and went along, humming softly. The driver, a nice young man, even gave me a compliment. "You look very elegant, ma'am." "Heading to a fancy party, I bet." I smiled and said, "I'm going to the happiest day of my granddaughter's life." When I arrived at the Gilded Manor Estate, that's what they christened it to sound fancy. The place was dazzling, arches of white flowers, fairy lights hanging from the trees, soft classical music playing. The guests were arriving, all well-dressed, laughing. There were about 200 people. 200 people I knew. Family, friends, neighbors, distant relatives. Everyone greeted me from afar, waving their hands. "Good evening, Evelyn." What a beautiful party. I walked proudly to the main entrance. Richard and Susan were there receiving the guests. My son wore a tuxedo that looked tailored to his body. My daughter-in-law Susan wore an emerald green dress that shined brighter than a Christmas tree. "Richard's son, what a blessing," I said, approaching to give him a kiss. He didn't move. Richard looked at me, looked to the sides, and his face closed off. He didn't look like the boy I nursed. He looked like a bank manager denying me a loan. Susan, at his side, looked away and pretended to adjust a flower in the table arrangement. "Mom," he said, and his voice was cold as ice. "What are you doing here?" I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "What do you mean? What am I doing?" "I came to see my granddaughter get married. I came to the party." "Well, what else?" It was then that he took the folder the hostess was holding, ran his finger down the list once, twice, with a seriousness that tied a knot in my stomach. The music seemed to lower in volume. The 200 people in the line behind me fell silent. I felt every gaze upon me. "Mom, you aren't on the list," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. My smile froze. "What do you mean I'm not on the list, Richard? What kind of joke is this?" "It's no joke," he said impatiently. "Your name isn't here. There must have been a mistake with the invitation." A mistake with the invitation. The invitation I had paid for. The list that I myself helped Susan review so that no aunt from upstate would be left out. The humiliation rose up my face like a fever. I felt my cheeks burn. I looked at Susan, who was now looking at me with a tiny, victorious smile, almost imperceptible. I looked at the 200 people watching the scene. I saw Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor of 30 years, with her hand over her mouth, scandalized. I saw my nephew Charles pretending to look at his phone. No one said anything. No one defended me. I was expelled in front of everyone, treated like a crasher, a homeless person, a public nuisance. I took a deep breath. A whole lifetime of dignity was not going to be destroyed by an ungrateful brat. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry or scream. I adjusted my pearl necklace. I looked straight into Richard's cold eyes. "All right, son." My voice came out steady. To my own surprise, it didn't tremble. "If it was a mistake, I apologize for disturbing you." I turned around and took the longest walk of my life. I passed through the line of 200 people who parted to let me through, as if I were a contagious disease. No one touched me. No one offered an arm. I walked with my head held high, passing under the flower arches I paid for, listening to the classical music I chose, leaving the party I had provided. The Uber driver was still there in the waiting area. "What happened, ma'am?" "Did you forget something?" he asked. "Yes, I forgot," I said, getting into the car. I forgot who my son really was. The ride back to my apartment in the city was silent. The rage from the public scorn was so great I couldn't even cry. Moral indignation was drowning me. They used me, took my money, sucked my goodwill dry, and when it came time to celebrate, they discarded me like an orange peel. They wanted my money, but they didn't want me. They were ashamed of the old woman. I arrived home, and the silence of my apartment was deafening. The pink dress felt like a ridiculous costume. I took it off and threw it on the floor. I stood there in the living room, looking at Arthur's portrait on the wall. Arthur never would have allowed this. Arthur would have looked at Richard and said, "You are no son of mine." But Arthur was gone. It was just me. I could sit and cry. I could call my sisters and lament. I could take a sleeping pill and pretend that night never happened. But the Evelyn who returned from that party was not the same Evelyn who went. The humiliation had burned away the silly grandma and awakened Evelyn Banks, the woman who managed her husband's business for 10 years after he got sick. The woman who balanced the books, negotiated with vendors, and knew the value of every dollar. I didn't cry. I went to my small home office, opened the filing cabinet, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored folder. On the cover, it said Claire's wedding. Inside was everything. The contract signed with the Gilded Manor estate in my name, the receipts for the banquet in my name, the invoices for the decoration in my name, the bank transfer confirmations, going from my account to the account of every vendor. I picked up the phone. It was about 8 p.m., but I knew he would answer. "Mr. Matthews, good evening. This is Evelyn Banks." There was a pause on the other end. "Mrs. Banks, what a surprise. My congratulations. Isn't today the big day of your granddaughter's wedding?" My lips curled into a smile that held no joy. It was an iron smile. "Mr. Matthews, you have been my attorney for over 30 years because you are the best, and I need you to be the best tomorrow morning. You have 5 minutes for yourself, Mrs. Banks." "Actually, I have all night." "What happened?" "What happened is that I was invited to leave the party I paid for. What happened is that my son and daughter-in-law made a small calculation error. They thought they could keep my money and treat me like garbage, and I need you to help me correct that error." I sat in my leather chair, the folder open in front of me. The pain in my chest was still there, the shame still burned, but now there was something else. There was a plan. Richard thought he had left me out of the party. He didn't know that I had just closed the door on the comfortable life he knew. The next day, he wasn't going to receive a little apology letter. He was going to receive a notice. I didn't sleep that night. How does one sleep after being kicked out of their own granddaughter's wedding like a stray dog? I sat in the armchair in the living room, the pink dress still lying on the floor, a monument to my humiliation. Every hour on the hour, the grandfather clock Arthur had given me seemed to scream in my face, "Error, error, error." The sun rose, but the house remained dark to me. I didn't make coffee. The smell of fresh coffee, which was always my comfort, tasted bitter that day. The pain in my chest was no longer the sharp stab of the night before. It was a dull, heavy ache. Grief. I was mourning the son I thought I had. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. Mr. Matthews wasn't just my lawyer for 30 years. He was also Richard's godfather. He had watched my son grow up. "Evelyn," he said as soon as I opened the door. He didn't say good morning. He looked at my face, my sunken eyes, and his expression of concern transformed into righteous anger. "For the love of God, sit down, Evelyn, sit down." "I won't sit, Matthews. I'm fine. The folder is on the table." He took off his jacket. A man of about 75, but still with the straight back of someone who spent a life fighting in courtrooms. He sat at the dining table, opened the cream folder, and began to read. I stood looking out the window. It was a beautiful day. The neighbors' kids were playing in the courtyard. A normal Sunday. A Sunday where I should be having breakfast at a luxury hotel, laughing with my granddaughter about the party, maybe complaining about my feet hurting from so much dancing. "Evelyn," Mr. Matthews called out, and his voice snapped me out of the trance. "I'm looking at the catering contracts, the decoration receipts, the venue rental, everything is in your name." "I paid for everything, Matthews. Even the wedding favors," I said without turning around. "And the payments?" "All went from my personal account, direct transfers." He tapped his finger on the bank statements I had stapled. "They have no way to argue this was a gift in the legal sense. You were the contracting party for all services. Technically, the party was yours. You were the host." I laughed. A dry sound that scraped my throat. "Hostess." "And they left me at the door." "What irony." "That is more than irony, Evelyn. That is base behavior." He fell silent. He knew Richard. I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking of the boy he saw make his first communion. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "We can sue for moral damages? Public humiliation with 200 witnesses?" I turned and looked at him. "Matthews, what do you think I want? An apology? A settlement check paid with my own money?" It was at that moment that the penny dropped, not the realization of the humiliation, but the realization of power. They didn't see me as a mother or grandmother. They saw me as a source, a well of money that never runs dry. And what do you do with a well when you don't need it? You cover it up. Or in their case, stop me from entering the party so I don't ruin the photo. I remembered years of being underestimated, years of being treated like the little old lady. "Oh, Mom, you don't understand real estate investment. Richard told me when I suggested he not buy that luxury car and instead invest in a rental apartment. Mrs. Banks, that phone is too complicated for you," Susan told me with that pitying little voice when I asked about the banking app. They didn't know that after Arthur passed, I managed the freight transport company for 10 years. I negotiated contracts with drivers, dealt with the union, created cash flow spreadsheets that would make Susan weep. I sold the company 5 years ago for a fortune Richard and Susan thought was just a good pension. They had no idea of the size. They thought my $100,000 for the party was a huge sacrifice. For me, it was pocket change I gave with love, and which they spit in my face. I saw myself from the outside. The good widow, Mrs. Evelyn, the one who bakes banana bread, who watches the grandkids so the couple can go out, who signs the check for the granddaughter to study abroad, who pays off the daughter-in-law's credit card just this once. I wasn't a person to them. I was a function. "Matthews," I said, and my voice was different now. That tremble of tears had disappeared. It was the voice of Evelyn Banks, director of Banks & Sons Transport, as Arthur had named the company, even though Richard was still a child. "Keep this wedding folder. It is proof of the damage, but it is not the weapon." Matthews looked at me, confused. "Evelyn, I don't understand. Where are Richard and Susan right now?" I asked. "Well, today is Sunday. The wedding was yesterday. They must be leaving for their honeymoon in Paris." "I think I heard Claire mention it," he said. "Perfect. They will have 15 days of happiness. They're going to need to cherish that memory." I went to my other office, not the social one where I keep the house receipts. I went to Arthur's office, which I always kept locked. I opened the safe, pulled out another folder, a blue folder. I went back to the living room and placed the blue folder in front of Mr. Matthews. "And this?" he asked. "This," I said, "is power rediscovered." He opened it. There were 2 deeds, the apartment where Richard and Susan live, in Manhattan. 3 bedrooms, master suite with bath, large balcony. Matthew's eyes widened. "It's in your name, Evelyn." "Of course it is. I bought it as an investment. Richard came with the story that rent was too expensive, that Susan wanted a better place to raise the children. I told them they could live there as a favor, a verbal commoditum. There is no signed paper, no lease agreement. They've lived there for 8 years for free. They never paid a dime of the condo fees. I pay them. They never paid property tax. I pay it." "And the other deed?" he asked. "The beach house in the Hamptons, where they spend every long weekend and vacation, where Susan takes photos and uploads them to social media saying, Our paradise. Matthews swallowed hard. And in the garage. Matthews, go to my parking spot, I continued. I have an imported car, dark gray. It's the car Richard uses, the company car. He tells his friends the company was his. I sold the operation, but I kept the cars. The car is in my name. The insurance is in my name. The registration, I pay it. Mr. Matthews closed the blue folder. He leaned back in the chair. He no longer looked like a lawyer. He looked like a general, looking at a war map. Evelyn Banks, what do you want me to do? They removed me from the party. They erased me from the list. Well, I will do the same. I started pacing the living room. The headache was gone. The hunger was gone. The sadness had turned into jet fuel. First, the Manhattan apartment. I want an extrajudicial eviction notice served the moment they step foot in the airport returning from Paris. I want a process server waiting at the building. No, better yet, I want the notice taped to the door of the apartment that isn't theirs. 30 days to get out. 30 days. Evelyn, that is what the law prescribes, isn't it? He asked. If it were up to my heart, I'd give them 30 minutes, but I follow the law. 30 days. Second, the beach house. Change the locks. Hire a security company tomorrow. If they try to enter, it's trespassing. Third, the car. That's simpler. You're going to send a certified letter demanding the immediate return of the asset. If he doesn't return it in 48 hours, we file a report for misappropriation. Fourth, I stopped, went to my purse, which was thrown on the armchair, took out my cell phone, and opened the banking app, the very same one Susan swore I didn't know how to use. I went to scheduled transfers. There it was. Asterisk allowance, Richard Banks, Exxon. 4,000 every first off the month. Asterisk, he looked at the cancel button. Matthews, he said, showing him the screen. Look at this. Hessewitten whistled. 4,000 a month, he murmured. It's help for the son. As they like to say, Susan doesn't work. You know, she says she's a digital influencer. She influences her friends to buy things with my money and Richard's salary. In that little advertising firm he opened, he barely makes enough for the suit he humiliated me in. I pressed the cancel button. A red light appeared. Scheduled transfer canceled. Done, I said. Fourth. Mr. Matthews stayed silent for a good minute. He looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at me in years. Not with pity, as one looks at a widow, but with respect. The same respect he had for Arthur. They are going to hate you, Evelyn, he said quietly. They already hate me, Matthews. They just hid it well because they needed my money. They don't hate me because I'm mean. They hate me because I'm old, because I remind them they are nothing without me. The hate was already there. The only thing that will change is that now they will hate me from afar and poor. And Claire, your granddaughter, that one hurt. That was the knife that twisted. Claire, my little girl, she was an accomplice. Either she knew the grandmother who paid for her dress wasn't on the list and did nothing, or she was a useful idiot manipulated by her mom and dad. Claire made her choice, I said, and my voice cracked for the first time. When she saw her father stop her grandmother at the door and didn't say a single word, she chose. She chose luxury. She chose the party. She chose their side. Now she will have to live with the side she chose. But without Grandma's benefits. I took a deep breath. You spend your whole life giving roots to your children, Matthews. You bury yourself in the dirt so they can grow strong. But when the tree grows and only bears rotten fruit, you have to stop watering it. And sometimes, Matthews, sometimes you have to cut down the whole tree. Mr. Matthews stood up, put the blue folder in his briefcase, and grabbed his jacket. I will prepare the notices today, Evelyn. The process server will be at the building when they return. The locksmith will be in the Hamptons tomorrow. He stopped at the door. And you? Will you be all right? I looked at Arthur's portrait on the wall. He was still smiling. As always. I am already fine, Matthews. Last night I felt like a mistake. Today I feel like a beginning. He nodded and left. I closed the door. The house was silent, but it was no longer the silence of defeat. It was the silence before the battle, the silence of strategy. My son and daughter-in-law were flying over the Atlantic drinking champagne, laughing at the crazy old woman they had tricked. They were going to the City of Lights. They didn't know that upon their return, all the lights of the easy life they knew would be turned off. The next 15 days were the strangest of my life. Richard and Susan were in Paris, sipping champagne and eating expensive cheese, and I was in New York dismantling the life I had built for them. The execution was silent, exactly as I planned. The silly grandma was replaced by Evelyn Banks, strategist. I felt like a war general, moving my pieces on a board only I could see. The first day, Monday, Mr. Matthews called me. "Evelyn, the locksmith is already in the Hamptons. The locks on the beach house will be changed before noon." "Perfect," I replied. "Send me the receipt and the new keys with a trusted courier." While he took care of the beach, I took care of my home. I finally picked up that pink dress still on the floor of my bedroom. I didn't wash it. I tore it. I ripped it apart with my own hands, with a cold rage I didn't know I possessed. I cut it into pieces and put it in a trash bag. Then I did a cleaning. I went to the guest room, the one they called our room when they stayed here. I stripped the expensive sheets Susan demanded I buy, the embroidered towels. I removed everything, stuffed it into trash bags too. The guest room went back to being just that, a guest room. I passed by the living room and stopped in front of the main picture frame. It was a photo from last Christmas. Me, Richard, Susan, and Claire, all smiling. Susan's smile was the same one she gave me before Richard kicked me out of the party. I took the frame, removed the photo, and put it in a dark drawer. In its place, I put a photo of me and Arthur the day we opened the trucking company. Both of us young, covered in grease, but with the smiles of people who felt they had conquered the world. "Ready, Arthur," I whispered. "Now the house is in order." A week passed. The first of the month arrived. That was the day I waited for most, the day of the $4,000 allowance. I got up early, made my coffee, sat in my armchair, and stared at the clock. I knew that in Paris, with the time difference, it was already mid-afternoon. I closed my eyes and imagined the scene. Susan, with her shopping bags in the most expensive district, entering another designer handbag store, handing over the debit card. The clerk, with his nose in the air, swipes the card once, twice. "I'm sorry, madame." Declined. I imagined Susan turning red. "What do you mean declined?" "Try again. My husband is rich." I imagined Richard at the corner cafe trying to pay for croissants and his card also being declined. I imagined the silent panic, the first crack in their perfect life. They didn't call me. But at the end of the day, a text message arrived on my old cell phone, the one I left on precisely for this. "Mom, are you okay? The money didn't hit. Did something happen to you?" It was from Richard. Note the concern. It wasn't Mom. "How do you feel after the party?" It was the money didn't hit. Did something happen? I looked at the message. My fingers wanted to reply, to write everything I had stuck in my throat, but Evelyn the strategist knew that silence at this stage was more powerful than any word. Silence was my weapon. They were in Paris without the extra money, staring at an empty bank statement and understanding nothing. Confusion was the first stage of the plan. I didn't reply. I just deleted the message. In the following days, Mr. Matthews kept working. "Evelyn," he told me over the phone, "the eviction notice for the apartment is already registered. The process server is scheduled for the day of their arrival, just as you asked. The certified letter demanding the return of the vehicle has already been sent to the Manhattan address. When they arrive, the doorman will hand it to them." I felt light. I had rediscovered a purpose. I spent years being the grandmother, and there is nothing wrong with being a grandmother, but I had forgotten to be Evelyn. I started leaving the house. I went to the beauty salon. I cut my hair into a short, modern style, the kind Susan said was for young girls. I dyed it a luminous chestnut, covering the gray that aged me. I went to the mall, but not to buy gifts for my granddaughter or clothes to wear around the house. I bought a new computer, the most modern one. I hired a young man to come give me private lessons. "I want to learn how to use everything," I told him. "I want to know about spreadsheets, investments, apps." Susan thought I didn't even know how to unlock a phone. She didn't know that this week I had used the banking app to transfer 90% of my assets into an investment fund with security locks that not even the Pope could touch. The rest, the day-to-day money, I put in a new account at a digital bank that only I had access to. The old account, the one Richard knew about, I left with just $100 in it, just in case he tried something. It was armored. On Saturday, the day before they returned, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove. I took the keys to my own car, an older model but one I adore, which was parked in the back, and drove out to the Hamptons. I arrived at the beach house and used the new keys Mr. Matthews' courier had brought me. The house was silent, smelling of the sea and closed furniture, but it no longer smelled of Susan's sweet, cloying perfume. There were no bottles of Richard's imported beer in the fridge. It was my house. I sat on the deck facing the ocean I paid for and cried, but it wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a cry of relief. I cried for the Evelyn who let herself be used. I cried for Arthur, for having allowed his son to become this monster of ingratitude. But it's over, my old love, I said, looking at the sea. The circus is over. From now on, the one who commands my life and my money is me. I slept at the beach house and returned Sunday, the day of their arrival. I knew the flight from Paris arrived at JFK around 5 p.m. I did the math, customs, luggage, traffic. They would arrive at the Manhattan apartment around 8 p.m. I got ready. I took a bath with salts, put on silk pajamas, made myself chamomile tea, and sat in my favorite armchair, the one facing directly at the phone. I wasn't nervous. I was at peace. At 8:15 p.m., the phone rang. Richard's number. I let it ring 3 times. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello? What came from the other side wasn't a voice. It was a scream, a roar of a wounded animal. Mom, what is the meaning of this? Has she gone crazy? Is she kicking us out? I pulled the receiver away from my ear. I could hear Susan screaming in the background. She lost her mind. She wants to kill us with anger. Call the police, Richard. I waited for the volume to lower. Richard, please, speak lower. I'm not deaf. What are you talking about? I asked with all the innocence I could feign. What am I talking about? He bellowed. I have a paper taped to the apartment door, a process server, an eviction order. 30 days. What kind of joke is this, Mom? Ah, that, I said, as if remembering an unimportant detail. It's not a joke, son. It's an extrajudicial notice. It's quite serious. Serious? You're throwing your son out on the street? Your only son? I'm not throwing you on the street, Richard. I'm asking for my apartment back. What I do with it is my problem. Where you go to live now is your problem. On the other end, there was silence, an icy silence. He didn't expect that firmness. He expected me to cry, to apologize, to say it was a lawyer's mistake. It's about the wedding, isn't it? His voice changed, losing the anger and gaining the negotiating tone he uses to ask me for money. Mom, for the love of God, Susan got nervous. She doesn't know how to organize the list. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. We wanted to call you from Paris to apologize, but mistake, I cut him off. Mistake was the invitation I received, or rather, that I paid for, and that you used to humiliate me in front of 200 people. But Mom, it was a misunderstanding. You weren't on the list. It was the list of sponsors. The hostess got confused. No, I said. And my voice was pure ice. You looked me in the eyes and said, Mom, you are not on the list. Must be a mistake with the invitation. You stopped me, Richard. You and your wife treated me like a nuisance, and I finally understood. Understood what, Mom? That you're going to destroy your family? No, Richard. I understood that I no longer have a family. What I have is a son and a daughter-in-law who are parasites, who suck my money, live in my apartment, use my beach house, and still have the nerve to bar me from the door of the party I paid for. That's not true. We love you, Susan shouted, snatching the phone. You love my money, Susan, but the money is gone, I said. What do you mean gone? Richard took the call back, now in total panic. The money, the first of the month allowance? What happened? What happened is that I'm old, Richard. And old people spend a lot on medicine, you know. The money is gone. The well has run dry. Those $4,000 a month are finished. The imported car, for which the doorman handed you the return letter, I need it back. I'm going to sell it. I need money to live. Sell it? But it's my car. I use it for work. It's my car, Richard. And you're going to have to work a lot now because, besides that, you have 30 days to get out of my apartment. You can't do this. I'm your son. I'll sue you. I'll say you're senile. I'll have you committed. I'll petition for conservatorship. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh. Try it, Richard. Try to sue me. But you'll need a good lawyer, and lawyers cost money, and as I told you, your money is gone. Mr. Matthews is very busy. Now he works full-time for the senile old lady here. I waited for him to breathe. Richard, I said, closing the conversation. You erased me from the party by mistake. I am erasing you from my life by decision. You have 30 days. The clock started running the moment you read the notice. Good night, son, and welcome back from your honeymoon. I hung up. The silence in my living room was the most beautiful sound in the world. I hung up, and for the first time in many years, my house, which used to seem big and empty, seemed the perfect size. It was the size of my peace. The silence that followed wasn't of loneliness, it was of control. Of course, the phone didn't take 10 seconds to ring again, and again, and again. Richard and Susan must have been taking turns hitting redial as if their lives depended on it, and in reality, they did. I didn't answer. I went to the device, that landline phone Susan said was a museum piece, and pulled the cord from the jack. I sat on the sofa, and for the first time since the night of the party, I breathed deeply, and the air didn't weigh a ton. The shame, the humiliation, all of that had left me and gone to the right place, to those who deserved it. I slept. I slept 8 hours straight, a heavy sleep, without nightmares. The next day, I woke up with the sun on my face. The first thing I did was go to the kitchen and make my coffee. That strong coffee Arthur said could wake the dead. While the water dripped through the coffee, I picked up my new cell phone, the one Richard didn't even know existed. I opened the messaging app, 37 unread messages, all from Richard and Susan sent during the wee hours. I read the first one. Mom, for the love of God, answer. It was a mistake. Let's talk. I read the second. You monster, destroying your son's life. Susan feels sick. If something happens to her, it will be your fault. I read the third. Evelyn, Richard here. I thought about it. Let's make a deal. How much do you want to stop this craziness? Half the apartment is mine. By right of inheritance. I laughed out loud. Inheritance. I was still very much alive. I deleted all the messages without reading the rest. I went to my computer class. While I was learning to make pivot tables in Excel and discovering I was very good at it, the first act of their desperation was occurring in Manhattan. Richard, after a sleepless night, decided he was going to show who was boss. He got up, put on the expensive suit paid for with my money, and went down to the garage to take the imported car, my car, to go to the office of his little company. He didn't count on George, the doorman. Good morning, Mr. Banks. Good morning, Mrs. Banks. Glad you're back, said George, polite as always, but without taking his hand off the gate button. Good morning, George. Open up. I'm late, said Richard, pressing the remote. The car beeped. The gate did not. George, I pressed it. I'm in a hurry. George stepped out of the booth. He looked embarrassed. I apologize, sir, but I have express orders from the owner from Mrs. Evelyn Banks. Richard froze. Orders about what? About the car. He pointed to the vehicle. That car cannot leave the garage. It is on the list of assets to be returned. The insurance company has already been notified, and if you take it, Mrs. Banks said to call 911 and file a stolen vehicle report. I really apologize, but those are the rules. The owner of the car is her. I learned of the scene later from Mrs. Higgins, my neighbor across the street, who was walking her dog and saw everything. She said Susan started screaming at the doorman, calling him an errand boy and an old lady's puppet. Richard, red as a tomato, had to open the car, remove the child's car seat, which I also paid for, throw it on the garage floor, and leave on foot, huffing, to look for a taxi. That was the first concrete consequence. Public humiliation exactly like mine, only his, instead of in a hall with 200 people, was in front of doormen and gossiping neighbors. The great businessman prevented from taking his car. The second consequence arrived at lunchtime. Susan, desperate and hungry, tried to order food via an app. Card declined. Tried another. Declined. Tried Richard's. Declined. Those $4,000 that dropped every first of the month weren't an extra. They were their oxygen, and I had closed the tank. They couldn't call me because I had disconnected the phone. They couldn't use the money because I had cut it off. They couldn't use the car because I had blocked it. So they did the only thing they could do. They came to find me. I was returning from my class carrying my new computer in a nice bag. When I arrived at the entrance of my building, there they were. They looked like castaways. Susan, with messy hair, runny makeup. Richard with a wrinkled suit and a look of hatred I had never seen. "Mom!" shouted Richard, coming toward me. I stopped. My doorman Frank was about to intervene, but I signaled him to stay calm. "Richard, Susan, what an unpleasant surprise," I said coldly. "Open the apartment door. We're going to talk inside," he said, trying to grab my arm. I pulled away. "I am not going to talk to you, and you are not entering my home." "You can't do this. I'm your son. I live here. You haven't lived here for 10 years, Richard. You live in an apartment that is mine. And as far as I know, the 30-day clock is already ticking." "Mrs. Banks," started Susan with a tearful voice, the voice of falseness. "Please, you are being very cruel. We made a mistake. We apologize." "It was the girl with the list." She got confused. "Susan," I interrupted her, "your acting is terrible. The girl with the list was you, and you watched me be stopped. You watched your husband humiliate me and you smiled. That little victorious smile. I remember it well. You thought you had won, didn't you? That you had kept the $100,000 wedding and got rid of the inconvenient old woman on the same day." "A great deal." Susan turned pale. She was speechless. Richard switched to threats. "You're going to regret this. You're old. You're crazy. I'm going to put you in a nursing home. I'm going to have you declared incompetent. I'm going to prove you're senile, spending the family money like a lunatic." I looked at him. My son, the baby I nursed, the man who was now threatening to strip me of my capacity so he could keep robbing me. And I started to laugh, a laugh so loud it startled poor Frank. "Senile, Richard? Is that what you think?" I pulled my new cell phone from my bag. "See this? This is the banking app, the same one Susan said was too complicated for me. Do you know what I did this morning? I bought stocks in major companies. I know how to do it." "And what do you know how to do besides spend my money?" I continued, the voice of Evelyn Banks, owner of Banks & Sons Transport, taking control. "You want to declare me incompetent? Try it, but you'll need proof." "Do you know what I did last week, Richard? I went to a forensic psychiatrist, one of the best in the country. I paid $500 for the consultation. I have an 8-page report stating that I am perfectly lucid, more lucid than ever." "Mr. Matthews has a copy. Any judge who sees your petition is going to laugh in your face and see that you are just an ungrateful son trying to rob his mother." Richard's face went from rage red to dizzy green. He hadn't thought of that. What did they think I was? A faucet that opens for them to draw water and then closes? They forgot who built the reservoir. It was time for the complete revelation of the power they never knew I had. You are desperate for that 3-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. You are crying over the imported car. You are mourning the $4,000 a month. You think that is my money. I laughed again. That, my dears, is my bread change. They didn't understand. "Richard, do you think I sold the transport company and just retired? Do you think I'm the little old lady living off small rents?" I stepped closer and spoke softly, with such firmness that he took a step back. "I sold the operation of the company. I sold the trucks and the contracts. I never sold the warehouses. Do you remember the industrial warehouses where your father worked? Those huge ones in Queens and New Jersey where you used to play at driving forklifts when you were a boy?" Richard blinked, stunned. "Yes. Well, there are 6 warehouses, 6, and they are rented out. One to Amazon, another to FedEx, another to a big pharmaceutical company. Do you know how much rent I receive a month, Richard?" "No, you don't know, because if you knew, you would have treated me like a queen, even if only out of interest." I paused to let them assimilate it. "Those $100,000 I gave for Claire's wedding, which you used to humiliate me, do you know what that represents in my monthly income? About what I pay in property taxes. It was pocket change, Richard. Pocket change I gave with love and which you spit on." Susan's jaw literally dropped. She stood with her mouth open, looking at me as if I were a ghost. Richard was pale. He seemed to have aged 10 years right there on the sidewalk. "You thought I was just grandma, mommy, but you forgot that I am Evelyn Banks, Arthur's widow, the woman who ran a trucking company alone for 10 years and tripled its value. You underestimated me. That was your mistake, not the mistake on the invitation. I turned to Frank. Frank, please call security. These two people are bothering me. No, Mom, wait! Richard shouted desperately. The game had changed in a way he couldn't keep up with. Don't call me Mom. Your right to call me Mom stayed at the door of the party. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have Italian class in a while. Arrivederci. I entered the building. Frank closed the glass door in their faces. I didn't look back. I went up in the elevator. When my new cell phone rang, it was a number I didn't know, but I answered. Hello? Grandma? Grandma, it's Claire. Her voice was cracking. My heart, that grandmother's heart I believed hardened, stumbled a little. Claire, my granddaughter. What a surprise. How was the honeymoon in Paris? The party Grandma paid for was good. Abu. Sob. What is happening? Dad and Susan called me. They are hysterical. They say you went crazy, that you are kicking them out of the house. I took a deep breath. This was the final battle. I didn't go crazy, Claire. On the contrary, I've never been saner. I am just reclaiming what is mine. The apartment is mine, the car is mine, the money is mine. But, Grandma, why? Because of the party. I swear I didn't even notice. Everything was so fast. I was so nervous, and there was the final stab. You didn't notice, Claire? I said, and my voice was a thread of ice. You didn't notice that your grandmother, the only grandmother you have, the woman who raised you while your mother got her nails done, the woman who paid for your wedding dress, wasn't there? You didn't look at the front row where I was supposed to be and not see me? Didn't that seem strange to you? Did they kick you out, Grandma? She whispered. No. I arrived early, and your father kicked me out in front of 200 people. And you, my granddaughter, you got married, went to Paris, and in 15 days you didn't call me a single time to ask, Grandma, are you alive? You only called me now because your parents' money ran out. On the other end, absolute silence. I only heard her swallowed sobs. Your parents made their choice, Claire, and you with your silence made yours. You chose the party. You chose the luxury. Now live with your choices. I love you, my child. But the silly grandma who paid for everything and tolerated everything, she died. She died at the door of your party. I hung up. The elevator doors opened on my floor. I entered my apartment. The new power dynamic was not only established, it was cemented. My new reality began with silence. But it wasn't the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of a house at peace. In the days that followed, I felt like someone waking up from a long fever. The world seemed clearer, colors more vivid, and I was in charge. The 30 days I gave Richard and Susan to leave the apartment flew by for me and must have dragged like eternity for them. They didn't try to call me. It seems they hired a lawyer. Mr. Matthews called me laughing. Evelyn, a colleague spoke to me. A certain Mr. Miller. It seems Richard and Susan hired him to negotiate an amicable exit from the apartment, he told me. And what did you tell him, Matthews? I asked while watering my plants. I told him that Mrs. Evelyn Banks does not negotiate with people who treat her like garbage. That the only possible negotiation was the handover of the keys on day 30, or we would file for eviction. The poor guy was speechless. I think they didn't tell him the whole story. They never tell the whole story, I replied. And the car, Matthews? The car was already returned. Richard had to pay a tow truck to bring it to his office garage. Looks like he didn't have the courage to bring it himself. Well, at least one smart decision on his part. On day 30, promptly at 5 p.m., a courier left a manila envelope at the front desk. Inside were the keys to the Manhattan apartment and the keys to the beach house. No note, no apology, just surrender. I took those keys. They were heavy. Not because of the metal, but because of the lesson they had cost. I learned from Mrs. Higgins, God bless her, she's more efficient than CNN, that Richard and Susan didn't go to a luxury hotel. They couldn't afford it anymore. They had to rent a tiny one-bedroom apartment way out in the outskirts, in a humble neighborhood in the Bronx, with the little Richard managed to borrow. Susan, the digital influencer, had to sell the designer bags I paid for to scrape together the deposit money. The lesson they learned wasn't one of love or regret. That kind of people doesn't learn that lesson. The lesson they learned was about power. They learned the hard way that the money they loved so much came from them. No, it came from me. And that the person who controls the money controls the game. The humiliation they put me through was public. Their fall was silent, but definitive. The great businessman and the society lady were now taking public transit. But the biggest transformation wasn't theirs. It was mine. I sold the Manhattan apartment. I sold it in a week at an excellent price. The money didn't sit in the account. I used my new computer skills and started investing, but not just in stocks. I decided to invest in myself. I enrolled in Italian classes. That old dream. Buongiorno. Come state? I discovered I have a talent for languages and that the teacher, a very nice Italian gentleman named Lorenzo, loved my banana bread. I pulled an old project out of a drawer, mine and Arthur's, a small shelter for stray dogs. With the money from the apartment sale, I bought a plot of land upstate and started construction. Mr. Matthews offered to do all the legal work for free as a foundation. He said it was the most honorable thing he'd done in years. My house, once the stage of my loneliness, became a hub of activity. My friends from the neighborhood, who previously only saw me as the poor widow, now saw me differently. Mrs. Higgins stopped me in the elevator. "Evelyn," she said, taking my hand, "I need to tell you something. What you did it for all of us. For so much crap we swallowed silently all our lives. You screamed for all of us. I hadn't thought of it that way. I didn't do it for everyone. I did it for me. But by doing it for me, I ended up inspiring others. The positive impact wasn't just on my bank account, but on my soul and on those close to me. And Claire, my granddaughter, that was the part that still hurt. She didn't call me again, but about 2 months after her parents moved to the tiny apartment, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and my heart stopped. It was her, alone. She was thinner, without the designer bags. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt. She was no longer the dazzling bride who went to Paris. She looked like a scared little girl. I opened the door. We stood looking at each other for a long time. She couldn't speak. She just cried. "Grandma," she finally managed to say. "Come in, Claire." She entered and sat on the sofa. The same sofa where her parents sat to ask me for the wedding money. "Grandma, I separated," she said. I sat in my armchair. I wasn't surprised. "What happened, honey?" "The money. Grandma, the money ran out. Mark, my husband, he didn't marry me. He married Mrs. Evelyn Banks's granddaughter. When he found out my parents had lost everything, that you had cut them off, he changed. He became rude. He said I tricked him, that he wasn't going to support poor relatives." She looked at me, eyes full of a shame I knew well. "I discovered, Grandma, that the love I thought he had for me was just like the love my parents said they had for you, a love that depended on your bank statement." I got up, went to the kitchen, and made chamomile tea with honey, like when she was a little girl and had nightmares. I came back and put the cup in her hands. They were trembling. "And your parents?" I asked. "They are unbearable," she blurted out. "My mom cries all day blaming my dad. My dad screams all day blaming you. They don't ask me how I am. They only ask if I've come to talk to the old lady, if I've asked for forgiveness on their behalf." She looked at the tea. "They learned nothing. Grandma, they aren't sorry for humiliating you. They are angry because they got caught. They are angry because the well ran dry." And there was the lesson she had learned, harder than her parents. "Grandma, I know I was wrong." She looked me in the eyes. I was at the altar and I saw when you arrived. I saw when Dad stopped you. I saw and I did nothing. I was scared. Scared of ruining the party. Scared of what Susan would say. I was a coward, and I don't blame you for anything. You did what you had to do." I sat next to her on the sofa. She was my granddaughter, blood of my blood. "You spend your whole life, Claire," I said, and the voice was grandmotherly, not strategic. "You spend your whole life swallowing insults to keep the peace. You believe that being old means being nice, being a doormat for others to walk on. We forget that dignity has no age. It's not clothing you take off when you get old. It is our skin." I took her hand. "What I didn't do against your dad. I did it for myself. I chose my dignity. And that is a lesson that you, unfortunately, had to learn the hard way. I have nowhere to go, Grandma, she whispered. Mark kicked me out. I don't want to go back to my parents' house. I looked at the same girl I taught to ride a bike. There is a guest room in the back, I said. It was always yours. Claire didn't turn into a princess. She started working. I didn't give her money. I gave her an old computer and an internet connection. She, who was good at drawing, started doing freelance design work. She started paying her own bills. She started chipping in for the electric and gas. My transformation was complete, not because I had defeated my son, but because I had found myself. I had rediscovered Evelyn, the strong, lucid woman capable of managing 6 logistics warehouses and a dog shelter at the same time. The woman who now spoke Italian and understood stock market shares. Richard and Susan never sought me out again. I learned from Mr. Matthews that they tried to file a weird lawsuit, something about reverse abandonment of the elderly, an invention of their lawyer. The judge didn't even accept the case. They became a bitter footnote in my history. Today, I look back at that night at the estate door in the pink dress, and I no longer feel humiliation. I feel gratitude. It took being left out of the party I paid for to finally be invited to enter my own life. And from this party, I won't let anyone kick me out. When a door closes in our face, sometimes it is life pushing us to finally enter our own home, the home of dignity. No son, no money, and no party is worth more than the peace of a woman who finally chooses herself. If Evelyn's story touched your heart, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. If you were in my place, what would you have done? And tell me too, where are you listening to my story from? Yeah,